Squirrel hunting, is it even worth it? We're going to talk about it today on the Persistence Outdoors podcast. Hello, everybody. Samuel Allred here. Welcome back to the podcast. Today, I wanted to talk about something a little bit different. We often talk about big game hunting on this podcast because that's mostly what I'm interested in and spend the most time doing or attempting at least. But there are all sorts of other types of hunting out there. And I was talking last week about some low pressure hunts, especially for new hunters. And I figured that we should talk about squirrel hunting because squirrel seasons are going to be open. And really, it's not just a hunt for beginners. It's also a way for experienced hunters to get out and enjoy the fall in sort of a low pressure way. So I'm going to give you my thoughts on squirrel hunting. I've had the opportunity to hunt gray squirrels and fox squirrels down in Tennessee, also red squirrels up here in Idaho. Likely you have one of those types of squirrels in your area. I will compare and contrast hunting in those two different places a little bit. Then we'll talk about if it's worth it overall. You might have kind of guessed my answer because I enjoy it, but that's not the end of the story. And then after we go through that, we'll talk about some tips for hunting squirrels, especially when it comes to cleaning squirrels, because they're so small and they're kind of hard to get a hold of. So I've got a couple ideas for you to help make that process a little bit easier. Before we get into it, please take a moment to follow the podcast on whatever platform you listen on. Maybe leave a comment or leave a 5-star review. All of these things will help the podcast grow. And I want to see it grow because I put work into it, but it's also bigger than just me. The goal of Persistence Outdoors is to get more people outside and into hunting. And hunting is something that has enriched my life. It's something that I really enjoy, and I want it to be accessible to other people. Hunting is interesting because it's not necessary for modern life. Most people don't have to go out and kill an animal to survive. But there is so much rich tradition and connection with the natural world and understanding and personal growth that comes from hunting. And so I think it's important for other people to experience or at least have a better understanding of. And so all that to say, when you follow the podcast or share an episode with a friend to help the podcast grow, there's a far deeper connection that we're trying to foster here and a far bigger mission than just the podcast itself. So thank you so much for your support. And if you follow already, thank you so much. And we will continue to help more people get outside and into hunting. All right, so I want to start off by talking about some of my first experiences hunting on my own as an adult. So I say this a lot because I did hunt as a kid, but I was always hunting with somebody else who knew more than me, who kind of acted like a guide, and I was relying on them for all the know-how to field dress the animal, to find the animals. Sometimes I was even borrowing their equipment, and that's all good and well. I mean, it got me into hunting and I have wonderful experiences, but I didn't actually start hunting on my own and really own the entire process until I became an adult. And so I had hunted as a kid. I had hunted birds. I had hunted elk. Very low levels of success across the board because I just didn't invest that much time into it, although I enjoyed it when I did. I went to college, didn't really hunt in college because I was stuck on a college campus, didn't have a car, didn't really take any steps to make hunting a reality. And it wasn't until I was a young adult where I was thinking, man, I really miss hunting and I want to get back into that. And so I found myself in Nashville, Tennessee. And I was there for completely different reasons, not related to hunting, but it actually turned out to be a great place to get into hunting as an adult. That area just has so many opportunities to hunt whitetail, to hunt turkeys. There's some bear hunting opportunities within striking distance. And another favorite of mine down there was hunting squirrels. I think I got the idea to go squirrel hunting from the Meat Eater TV show. I had never eaten squirrels before or hunted them. When I considered shooting them in my backyard growing up, it was always like, why? I mean, I can shoot it just because it's annoying, but I don't really have a great reason to. And nobody wants to eat a rodent, so I'm just not going to do it. So never really shot squirrels. Granted, I was living in suburban areas growing up, but never really crossed my mind to shoot a squirrel and then eat it until I saw the Meat Eater TV show. And then I was like, that looks pretty fun. And it looks pretty accessible. All you need is a shotgun or a 22. So I was gearing up to go hunting in Tennessee, and one of the first seasons that opened was squirrel season. And I just wanted to get out hunting so bad that I decided to go squirrel hunting on one of the opening days of the season. So I did everything start to finish as best I knew how. I had downloaded the Onyx Hunt app, which shows you private and public land boundaries. And I found an area that was maybe 40 minutes from where I lived that was public. And I thought, great, I can go down here. It's a far drive for squirrels, but it wasn't too bad, and I was willing to do it just to get out hunting. And I went really early in the morning, probably earlier than I needed to. I started to notice that squirrels sometimes sleep in a little bit, or it seems like they don't get super active until the sun has warmed up a decent amount. But I was there, and I set out in the early morning light looking for squirrels. At the time, I didn't really know what I was looking for. And it's kind of funny because if you walk through any given park in most parts of the US, you're going to see squirrels. I mean, they're just everywhere. And it's even hard to avoid them. But then you go out into the woods, into sort of more of a wild habitat, and they can be much fewer and further between. But at the same time, they're not real hard to find. They're pretty obvious when you do notice them because they'll be running around in trees and maybe even making some noise. And so I just kept walking along, looking in the trees, looking for squirrels. And after walking for maybe half an hour, I saw some waving in a tree, a big deciduous tree, and I thought, game on, here's my squirrel. It's funny how excited about squirrels I can get because they're so small, and really the payoff for all the effort that you put into it isn't that much. But man, anytime I see a squirrel and I have something I can shoot it with, I get excited every time. And I think that's part of what I enjoy about hunting in general. And the fact that it even happens with squirrels makes squirrel hunting enjoyable as well. So I'm watching this tree. I think there were actually 2 squirrels, and I needed to get a little bit closer. I didn't really trust the range of my shotgun, I suppose. I hadn't shot a shotgun at animals in a long time, and I don't know. I wasn't certain of how far the shotgun was capable. So I got pretty close. I was probably 20 yards away, which is plenty close. And I wasn't doing anything to conceal myself. Really, the squirrels were just in the tree, and I walked right up. One stopped moving around, and it noticed me. And it was a funny experience because it was there. I was thinking, I guess this is it. I put up my shotgun, put the bead on the squirrel, and I think, I hope this works. Pull the trigger. Sure enough, it works. The squirrel falls out of the tree completely dead. The other squirrel ran off, and I spent some time looking for it, but eventually I just went up to get the squirrel that I had shot. And it was kind of cool. It was actually a fox squirrel. And so these squirrels, compared to gray squirrels, are pretty big. And I think it was a big female fox squirrel, if I remember correctly. So I go up and I was pretty thrilled that it was a fox squirrel. I was just taking a look at it. In Tennessee, most of the squirrels that I saw around were gray squirrels. So it was kind of just happenstance that I found a fox squirrel. And I was excited about it. It was a beautiful animal. It was a great shot. I mean, no suffering, anything like that. And I was pretty stoked to have gone out hunting and actually been successful. Well, the story doesn't end there. I spent a little bit more time looking around for squirrels. I didn't find any. They were probably pretty wary after my shotgun went off. I started walking back, and as I was walking back, it started dumping rain. And if you've ever been caught in Tennessee rain, it's always a lot of water. So at some point, I stopped under some trees, and I had Gore-Tex lined hiking boots on. I literally took off my boots and poured water out of them. And then I took off my socks and wrung those out and then put them all back on. And I was still soaking wet. So the squirrels weren't really out in all that rain. And I was just walking back. And I finally got back to my car. I think it stopped raining. And I decided it was time to gut the squirrel. And this is actually kind of funny. I had a couple of knives, but I must have had a clue that they probably weren't that sharp. And so I start to go work on the squirrel, and I realize that the hide is pretty tough, even for a small little critter. And my knives are nowhere close to sharp enough to handle it. And so I had brought a couple different knives, as I said, and I think they were just folding pocket knives. And I flicked one open. I was trying to cut around the circumference of the squirrel to pull off the hide. The other thing was that the squirrel had stiffened up in the time between me shooting it and bringing it back to my car. And so it wasn't very limber and it was hard to work with. And I was really worried at the time that if I spent too much time trying to gut the squirrel, that the meat was going to spoil. Now that I've hunted some, I understand that I probably had a lot more time than I thought, but I was really cognizant about caring for that meat, and I wanted to make sure that it didn't spoil. And therefore, I was kind of nervous and rushing. So I'm squatting on the ground, working on this squirrel. I open one knife, decide it's not sharp enough, open another knife and set the first knife aside, keep working on it. At this point, I'm not really making precise cuts. I'm just hacking at it. And eventually I was able to get the hide off, but it wasn't a pretty job. And I got lots of hair on the meat. And at that point I figured, hey, I got the guts out. I'm going to bring it home as quickly as possible and get it into a refrigerator. So I rushed to my car. I put the squirrel in a Ziploc bag. I turn on the AC to keep it cool. And then I drive 40 minutes home. And it's not until I get to my apartment that I realize that I left 2 open pocket knives in the parking area on that public land. It's kind of funny. I mean, I really didn't need to rush, and I should have brought a knife sharpener. Hopefully some kid found those without stepping on them. I mean, they probably weren't sharp enough to damage anybody anyway. I'm sure if I were a kid, I would love to find some pocket knives in the woods, right? That's my contribution to the next generation of hunters, I guess. Anyway, I brought the squirrel home. I think I grabbed a paper towel and was trying to rub hair off of it, put it in the fridge, and then I had to decide what to do with it. And this was the part that made me a believer in squirrel hunting. I mean, I had fun, but at this point, I still didn't know if it was worth it. I didn't know if I was going to like the squirrel meat. So I decided to go the safe route and cook it in a slow cooker. I heard people say that squirrels can be rubbery and tough, and I thought nothing withstands the slow cooker, right? So I put it in a slow cooker and cooked it for like 8 hours, just one squirrel in a crock pot. And then I pulled it out and I was like, this is the moment of truth. We're going to see if it tastes good or if this all wasn't worth it. So I grab some of the meat from sort of what would be the backstrap on a bigger animal along the spine, and I just eat it straight from the slow cooker. And I was surprised. It was really good meat. It's hard to describe, but when I try to explain it to people, I usually say it's kind of like chicken, but without any of sort of the off flavors. And it might be a little bit sweeter, maybe with a hint of nuttiness. I don't know if I'm actually tasting that or if I'm just assuming it's nutty because it's a squirrel, but it really is delicious. And it doesn't have any of those flavors like you get in chicken when you like put chicken in a microwave. I'm really sensitive to those flavors, and sometimes you get them even in chicken that hasn't been reheated. But there was just none of that in this squirrel. And so it tasted like a very clean meat, if that makes any sense. The texture is finer than chicken. It has a finer muscle grain, and it wasn't rubbery at all. Granted, I had slow cooked it, but it really wasn't bad. And I think squirrels probably just get a bad rap. I think any animal is going to be rubbery if you cook it poorly, right? So just cook it the right way and it should be fine. And if you were going to use squirrels in a recipe, gray squirrels or fox squirrels at least, you could probably use them in place of chicken. I even made like a tuna biscuit casserole with squirrel instead of tuna, and that was pretty good. Really, anything that needs like dark meat from a chicken, you could probably use a squirrel instead. Okay, so that was my experience getting into squirrel hunting in Tennessee. And I went on many more squirrel hunts after that. I found myself driving like 45 minutes to go out and hunt squirrels for 4 hours. I would kill maybe one or two and then drive 45 minutes back. And even though I was hardly, bringing home any meat, I thought it was worth it. I thought it was fun. And so I kept doing it. Well, fast forward a couple years and I've moved to Idaho. And the first year I was here, I wasn't eligible to buy a resident hunting license. And I didn't want to pay all the money to get a deer or elk tag. So I ended up getting a small game license, and that was still expensive, but it got me out hunting even while I was waiting to become a resident. And so I got to Idaho and I learned that there were red squirrels to hunt in the coniferous forests. And I thought, this is going to be awesome. I love hunting squirrels, so let's do it. So I went out with a 22, and sure enough, it was a lot of fun to hunt red squirrels. I'm not going to go step by step through all of it because I've already told you a long squirrel hunting story. But safe to say, it was pretty easy to shoot some red squirrels. They like to scold you, and so they're very loud, and they're pretty active during the middle of the day. So you go hiking, and if you walk through their territory, they're likely to light you up. And then you just look in the direction where the sound is coming from, try to locate it, and then shoot it in the head with a 22. And it's a tiny, tiny target, so it can be pretty challenging, but there's just so many squirrels and they're so vocal that it was just some of the easiest hunting I had ever done. The thing about red squirrels, though, is that they are extremely small. And so I shot 5 squirrels, and from 5 squirrels, I got about 8 ounces of meat. That's hardly anything per squirrel, right? And 8 ounces of meat, that's like 1 serving of meat. Maybe you put that in a chicken noodle soup or something, but really I would need 10 squirrels or 15 squirrels to feed myself and somebody else. The other thing about them being so small is that when you try to clean them, it's very easy to damage them. I mean, there's hardly anything to hold on to, and so you have to grab it pretty good. And then when you do that, it's likely that you're going to rupture the really delicate intestines. And you're always trying to avoid that when you're cleaning animals. But it was pretty hard to clean the squirrel without soiling the meat in some way or another. And so with small game, sometimes that's going to happen and you just clean it with some vinegar in a rag, or you rinse it off and you call it good. But it definitely can't help the taste. And in a worst case scenario, it could actually make the meat spoil or make it dangerous to consume. So at this point, I've killed 5 squirrels. I've gone through all the work to clean them. And really, it takes the same amount of work to clean and cook a tiny squirrel that it does to cook a bigger squirrel. And then finally, I go to taste the meat. And I had heard people say that red squirrel meat is not that good. And frankly, I didn't really believe them because I had eaten gray squirrels and fox squirrels, and they were delicious. And so I was expecting this squirrel to be something like that. The meat was fine. It didn't taste piney to me, like some people say, but it did have a taste closer to ham, but it's like a ham that's not sweet. And it also had an iron taste. Overall, I wasn't impressed. So there are my 2 very different experiences hunting squirrels. And it brings me back to the question, is squirrel hunting worth it? And here's my answer. Gray squirrel hunting and fox squirrel hunting is for sure worth it. If you have the opportunity to go, you should try it. It's a lot of fun. It helps you build marksmanship skills if you're using a .22. If you're using a shotgun, it's just a great time, and they're good to eat. And so even though they're pretty small animals and it's not like you're bringing home steak, it's definitely worth hunting. On the other hand, red squirrel hunting to me is not worth it. They're so small and it takes so much work for such a small yield of meat that I don't really even enjoy that much, that it just doesn't make sense for me to shoot them. There's no economies of scale with a tiny little red squirrel. And even a gray squirrel is small, but there's enough meat on it that you can feed a person with 1 or 2. With a red squirrel, again, you're going to have to shoot 10, even more than that, and then prepare all of them to even get a reasonable amount of meat. Now, the one caveat I would say for red squirrel hunting is if I were going to go out hunting with a kid. Say I had a child who was interested in hunting, and I just wanted them to be able to get out, have some shot opportunities, learn the basics of hunting, how to be safe with a rifle, how to be quiet in the woods, all those things. I might take them out red squirrel hunting because they're going to be thrilled to have so many different shot opportunities, and they can start learning all about the process even with that tiny little animal. And if I'm teaching someone, I might be willing to go through the trouble of cleaning one of those tiny squirrels and cooking it up just to help them understand what hunting is all about. So if I were teaching a child, I might go red squirrel hunting. Still, it wouldn't be my first choice. I would still rather go grouse hunting or snowshoe hare hunting in my area. But if there were red squirrels in the area, I wouldn't mind letting my kid take a shot at one, providing they're willing to eat it. All right, let's shift gears a little bit and talk about some tips for hunting squirrels. Now, like I said in the last episode, I don't want to overcomplicate this for you, but I do have some ideas that will make squirrel hunting a little bit easier. So generally, when you're squirrel hunting, you want to use a shotgun or a rimfire rifle. Generally, a .22 long rifle is going to do the trick. There's pros and cons to each one, right? With a .22, you have to be so much more precise and shoot the squirrel in the head. The nice thing is that if you get a clean headshot, you don't damage any of the meat. With a shotgun, chances are you're going to send a pellet through the body cavity of the squirrel, and it could hit the guts. And so you may damage some meat or get some of the guts on edible meat, and that's not desirable. But either one will work. Just use whatever you prefer. I think a 22 is great because you can kind of practice your fundamentals of marksmanship even in a low pressure scenario. And then those will transfer over to when you're hunting big game with a rifle. But a shotgun is definitely going to increase your chances of killing squirrels and also hitting them on the move. With a rifle, you need to wait until they're still. With a shotgun, there's a good chance you can hit them even when they're running along branches. As far as shotguns go, I would recommend smaller shotguns, so 20 gauge or 410 shotguns. Really, you don't need a 12 gauge shotgun. Of course, you can hunt them with a 12 gauge if that's what you've got. But if you can, use a smaller shotgun so you don't damage as much meat. Shot size, anywhere between 4 and 6 is pretty good. It's not too hard to kill squirrels. Going up to 4 is nice because you have fewer pellets and you are less likely to damage meat. 6 is just going to give you a slightly better spread. When you're looking for squirrels, I would recommend looking near water and searching for mature trees. Some of these mature trees are going to provide food sources, especially mast crops like acorns and hickory nuts, and they always seem to be near water. Squirrels also like good weather, so if it's a cold or rainy day, it's probably not a great time to go squirrel hunting. Likely they're going to be denned up. But once the sun comes out, and if you're kind of enjoying the weather, chances are the squirrels will like that too. It's not hard to locate squirrels generally by just going on a hike, but it is helpful to go out and sit still. I remember deer hunting all the time, and often I would be sitting still waiting for deer, and I would see 4 or 5 squirrels anytime I was sitting still. Because you walk in and they might spook a little bit, but then if you sit still and let the forest calm down, they seem to come out, they're not afraid of you, and they're going to give themselves away. So a really good way to find squirrels is to go sit in a likely area and just be still for half an hour. And then if you've sat for a while and don't see squirrels, go try somewhere else. But being still for a while is a very effective method of getting them to show themselves. My next tips have to do with cleaning, and I think these are going to be the most helpful for you. So the first thing I recommend with squirrels is to clean them right away after you've killed them. Just bring a Ziploc bag or a couple Ziploc bags, and while the squirrel is still warm, go ahead and clean it. It's going to be a lot easier to get the hide off before the animal has gone into rigor. And so before it stiffens up, just slip that hide off. It will still be warm, it will still be pliable, and you'll be good to go. The next tip I have for cleaning squirrels is to use game shears. You might also find shears for gardening or for poultry. Any of these will work. They're basically just heavy-duty scissors. And you can use game shears to cut off the 4 paws, cut off the head, cut off the tail, and even make your cut around the circumference of the squirrel. And then you can just pull off the 2 cylinders of hide and it comes off pretty easy. But those game shears make it so easy to cut off the paws and the head and the tail. With a knife, sometimes you have to cut through the hide and then apply a lot of pressure to get through those bones. And with a sharp knife, it's not too bad. But with the game shears, it's just a piece of cake and it goes really quickly. So whenever I'm going squirrel hunting, I use those game shears. They're also helpful for other animals, other small game, and then when you're processing, you can use them as well to cut things up. One thing to check for when you're processing squirrels is the little gland in their armpit. It's just going to be a little bit of white tissue, and you generally want to cut that out. It's not going to taste good, and you don't want to put it in the slow cooker or fry it up. So just check for that in the armpit and cut that out, and it will make your final product a lot more pleasant. If you have a squirrel that you gut shot or otherwise didn't handle well, maybe you got too much hair on the meat or a little bit of dirt, One way to reduce the gaminess is to soak it in some water and lemon juice. So just maybe a tablespoon of lemon juice in a couple cups of water, and that acidity can help neutralize some of those bad tastes. And then finally, if you want to process the squirrels and save them to eat later, here's a method you can use. So once you have gutted the squirrels, you've taken the hide off, and then you cut it into quarters. Usually with a squirrel, you cut off the front legs, the back legs, and then you'll have a little piece of back, and there's some meat along the spine that is good to eat. Once you've parted it out like that, you can put it into like a heavy-duty Ziploc bag or into a Tupperware container, and you can fill it with water. And then you can put it in the freezer. And then the next time you kill a squirrel, you can part it out, put it on top of that, add some more water, and then freeze it again. And you'll have layers of squirrel completely frozen in ice. And then when you've killed enough squirrels to make a meal out of it, you can pull that out, let it all defrost, and all those squirrel parts will still be fresh and good to eat. So that's a simple way to store squirrels, or really any other small game, without having to use a vacuum sealer or without having to wrap the meat in plastic. Finally, like I said earlier, you can kind of use squirrels the same way you would use chicken, and maybe especially dark meat chicken. They're great in noodle soups. They are great slow cooked and shredded and used like shredded meat. One recipe that I've made before is squirrel roll-ups. I think I saw that on the Meat Eater TV show too. And it's just shredded squirrel meat with cream cheese and peppers, and you roll it all up in a crescent roll and cook it. And it's great. It's really a crowd pleaser. So there's all sorts of ways to cook squirrel. It's a very clean meat and it tastes great. I don't think you're going to have any problem incorporating it into chicken dishes. And then you can also just fry it up and eat the legs. You can bread it, or you can just fry it straight in a pan and eat the legs. And that's a perfectly good way to eat squirrels as well. All right, guys. Well, I hope these tips have been helpful for you, and maybe you learned something from my stories of getting out squirrel hunting. More than anything, I encourage you to go out and try it for yourself. If you have gray squirrels or fox squirrels in your area, go hunt them. It's really low pressure, it doesn't take much commitment, and it's a fun way to spend a morning. I think once you kill a squirrel and cook it up and eat it, you'll be a believer, just like I am. And after that, you'll never look at those little bushy-tailed rodents the same way ever again. With that, I will wrap this up. Happy hunting, everybody, and I will catch you on the next one.